would you start off by telling everyone a bit about who you are, maybe your journey with motherhood, and why you wanted to chat about breastfeeding today?
Yes, so I'm Amie. I'm a nutritional therapist, only just qualified, and I qualified at the same place as you, Vivian. And between second and third year, I got pregnant. Well, I had a year out between second and third year to have my little girl, and I think I thought I knew everything that there was to know about breastfeeding and new motherhood. I felt very prepared, and I think I quickly realised that when I actually had Isla, that nothing really can prepare you for it. And I think I was quite judgmental before having been through it and had the struggles that I had with initially trying to breastfeed. I think I was quite judgmental to new mums, thinking, well, I don't understand why you wouldn't breastfeed. Like, why wouldn't you when it's the best for your baby? You know, we have that drilled into us. But then having been through it, I can completely understand why anybody wouldn't or would have to, stop if you didn't have the right support network around you. So that sort of spurred me on to train as a breastfeeding peer supporter with, I'm lucky really, because in Wakefield we have a local charity, and they provide training. So I trained with them, and then I ran a baby group on a Friday morning for like the remainder of my maternity leave, and helped new mums that were coming to that. And yeah, I just spiraled from there really. So I think then, since completing my nutritional training, I've just really developed, and obviously my little girl's 2.5 now, so we're at a different stage altogether, and it's just sort of sparked an interest in infant feeding and childhood nutrition in general, really. So that's about it, really. That's sort of my journey into it. We didn't have a for a lot of people it just goes amazing, and you don't have any problems, and I don't want to scare anybody by saying that all these problems can come up, but we had a few problems with Isla not latching initially, and having to be syringe fed for a few days, and then people saying she didn't have tongue tie, but my gut were telling me that something were wrong, and then finally, after sort of walking into the hospital and demanding somebody saw Isla, we diagnosed with a tongue tie at 4 weeks, which is quite late actually, usually picked up a little bit sooner. And then mastitis, milk blisters. She'd only feed laying down, so you used to have to lay on the floor, and I was like, ow. And yeah, so that's it really, and that's sort of what spurred me on to want to support women and new mothers and families in general, because it can be really hard, and I think society is quick to judge both ways. If it's a newborn, they're quick to judge if they're not breastfed, and if it's a toddler, they're quick to judge because they're too old to be fed. And I just wanted to just try and clear that space up a little bit and offer support to those that need it, really. So yeah, that's me.
Definitely cover all of those troubleshooting things and what may be going on, but let's start off with the benefits of breastfeeding. So we hear about breastfeeding's best, but actually why is that? Like, what benefits does it provide? It's more challenging, so why do women want to breastfeed? What's so good about it?
Okay, well, I feel like we could probably fill a whole episode on this topic alone. But I will just say, just from the start, like, we're going to go into obviously like the benefits and things and why it's so amazing, but just want to actually say that this, like, I'm totally non-judgmental about it, and it's a very emotive topic. So although I like to spout the benefits and say how amazing it is, I'm not naive to the fact that it isn't right for everybody, and everyone's circumstances are different. So I just want to put that out there before I start banging on about the benefits, because I can get quite passionate about it.
Yeah.
I think it's amazing. Well, the first thing is it's the perfect first food for infants. It's personalised right down to the bacteria that it contains, is a direct reflection of mother's gut bacteria, and mother's antigens that she has, or exposure to things in her environment, which means that it's especially important to protect against infection and disease in the first few, well, at least specifically in the first few weeks when babies are really vulnerable, but it's protective, you know, filled with antibodies and things throughout. You know, it never loses that quality, basically. So whether you're feeding a 2-month-old baby or a 2-year-old baby, you're still giving them that extra sort of level of protection. The first milk is called colostrum, and that's the one that's really high in antibodies and protein content, and lots of vitamins and minerals as well. So it's really it's basically fluid, so it changes. It's amazing. Actually, it changes from literally from day to day in terms of what your child needs, but also even through the course of a feed. So from when you first start breastfeeding in one sitting, one feed, the quality of the milk at the beginning to the end of the feed will be different. So yeah, I feel like we could talk for ages about the specifics, but a couple of things just to pull out that are really amazing is it contains lactoferrin, which actually binds iron, and that actually stops the iron being available for pathogenic bacteria to proliferate. So again, just directly protecting baby. And there's a particular complex sugars that are found in breast milk, that for a long time scientists thought that they didn't have a job, they were just in there, nobody knew why. And then quite recently it's been discovered that they're actually there to feed bacteria in the gut. So Mother Nature specifically put them there as a food for the gut. And I know you talk a lot about gut health and you know, immunity and things like that, and it's the perfect food for setting up the baby's immune system and you know, creating that healthy gut and sealing the gut as well. So colostrum actually seals the gut, and breast milk continues to develop the gut wall right up until 6 months, when you might start thinking about bringing in food. So that's sort of specifics of it.
And I've taken colostrum myself, like for gut health reasons, obviously not human. They do like bovine colostrum, which is from a cow, and it's so effective for leaky gut protocols. I have my clients on it, either in powdered or capsule form, and it tastes pretty good. That may be weird, but it's like a creamy consistency, and because I don't eat dairy regularly, it kind of reminds me of dairy. Well, it is kind of dairy as well, and it's often suitable for those with dairy sensitivities because it's not developed the proteins like casein and lactose. So even people, maybe not a dairy allergy, but those with lactose intolerance or dairy sensitivity can often tolerate it very well. And you're right, very healing, anti-inflammatory, heals and seals the gut, reduces inflammation, so many benefits. And with breastfeeding, I've read before that the baby actually kind of transmits what it needs through the breast and through the nipple. That's absolutely crazy to think of. It'll tell you what it needs, like more protein, more fats, crazy stuff.
And if it picks up any bacteria or anything like that, it will communicate that with your body, so that your body will start making the antibodies and things before baby even shows any signs of illness. So it's pretty amazing. And I mean, I spoke about the specifics in terms of what it actually contains, but in terms of what that means, obviously we mentioned reduction in illness and things like that, but also a breastfed baby, research has shown actually has less likelihood of developing certain types of childhood cancers, which is amazing. Generally they have a higher IQs, better visual acuity, less risk of like asthma and allergies and eczema, and some people even use breast milk like topically on eczema and things like that in adults, you know. Amazing.
Perfect. And let's start off with the most common reasons that either people don't breastfeed or they struggle with breastfeed. Whatever you want to start off with, go ahead.
Okay. Most common reasons why women don't breastfeed, let's start with that. Well, The statistics in terms of those that actually want to breastfeed is pretty high. Most women say that they want to, but usually something gets in the way and stops them. I think a lot of that comes down to society. I think we're sort of, everybody who's a mother, not a mother, a father, you know, everybody knows children tend to know about bottle feeding, and they recognize that, they know what it means, and they know, you know, you've not had children yourself yet, but you'll have heard you'll know all about people saying, oh, they're due a feed, it's the feeding time, it's that, you know. And I think we're conditioned to think that that's the way that a baby should be. They should be fed every 3-4 hours, and they should be on a schedule. So I think breastfed babies aren't like that at all. Some of them may be, but they're definitely not, and they're fed on demand. So it could literally be every half an hour, it could be every 3 hours, it could be every 2. They could have just fed 10 minutes ago, and then they might want it again. And I think that makes women question whether or not they're doing it right, whether the body's producing enough, whether the baby's satisfied. But we have to remember that, you know, a dummy, for example, is made as a direct replacement of a mum's nipple. That's what it's designed on. So whereas a bottle-fed baby might use a dummy for comfort, a breastfed baby will want to use a nipple for comfort. And I think I've had numerous comments made to me when Isla was little, oh, she can't be hungry again, she can't need to feed again. And I think it's things like that that make new mums question whether they're making enough milk, whether they're doing it right, so they can start topping up with formula, and then that gets you into a vicious cycle, because breast milk's made on a supply and demand. So if you're giving any form of supplement feeding, that includes donor milk, you have to make sure that you're still removing that feed from your breast, otherwise your body could potentially regulate it down. So I think that's one of the big things. And then another thing I think is just that it can just be really exhausting and really hard. And I think I was lucky in that I've got a really supportive partner, and we sort of, it's a bit laughable really, but we actually had a conversation. Well, I told him before we had Isla that he wasn't even allowed to mention the word formula, even have any bottles in the house or anything, because when someone's at sort of a low point, feeling like they're struggling and they've not had any sleep, although your partner might think that they're doing you a favour by saying, you know, let's just give them a bottle just so you can get a few hours sleep, it's a slippery slope. And then I've heard instances of that happening, and then baby refusing the breast because they can get nipple confusion. Same with use of dummies before, we sort of say 6 to 8 weeks as a minimum before you introduce any artificial teat. And yeah, sometimes if it's introduced too soon, baby will never go back on the breast, and that can be really devastating then. And then a mum's potentially left either exclusively expressing, which is harder, like way harder, because every time you would usually be sat down feeding your baby, you're actually pumping, but then you've still got to get the milk in them. So that's just, I don't know how,
double the work.
Yeah, I don't know how some women, you know, exclusively pump, and I protect my hat off to them. I don't know how they do it. So yeah, I think a lot of it's to do with society and lack of understanding of what's normal and what's not. But then maybe a couple of the things that people that mums might run into, like problems. Well, I mentioned like doubting supply. So we have the charity that I work for, we have a Facebook group full of our local mums, and probably the most common question that's asked on there is about what we can do to increase supply. But then when you actually ask why, and you get down to the nitty-gritty of why the mum feels like they need to increase supply, it's because the child's feeding a lot. But again, this is an indicator that you don't have enough milk. So I think the best way to actually know whether your child's getting enough is to look at nappy output. That's what we always say. You know, if it's coming out, you know it's going in. So that's the best one to look out for.
Yeah, I always say I've got like no idea about any of this. I'll probably have a shock to the system when it happens for me. I'm sure that everyone feels the same, but yeah, I've got so many questions. So like with bottle feeding, do people just feed like every 3 hours and the baby isn't hungry in between? I'm confused, like with the breastfeeding, if they're like crying and telling you that they want more food, how is that different than the bottle situation?
Yeah, to be honest, because I've never ever bottle fed, Isla never took a bottle, and she's never had a drop of formula. I don't really understand it that much because I've not had the experience of it. But I do know, just from my own research and from a really amazing book actually that I read, that actually it shouldn't be that different in terms of if you are formula feeding, it's actually probably not a good idea to be on a really strict schedule, like maybe our parents or their parents might have done, like with their children, because it's still about responsive feeding. And especially with a child under 6 months, they're only having milk. And you know yourself, if you might be thirsty rather than not hungry, and you have a drink of water. Well, a breastfed baby or a bottle-fed baby, they're not going to have that. So personally, I think if I was to, who knows what will happen with the next one or whatever, if I were bottle feeding, I would still act feeding responsibly. So in terms of feeding when the child, I offer it, they can say no, they can't say no, but they will tell you if they don't want it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think insisting that a child finishes a feed as well. So and I know you speak a lot about everybody being different and what works for one won't work for another. Well, every child is different. Every infant will feed differently because that's just humans and that's what humans are like. So on a tin of formula, you'll see, the amount that the baby should be having for what age they are. And a lot of mums get really stuck on that. Even if weight gain's absolutely fine and baby's thriving, you've probably been out and you've seen mums like trying to get a feed in, and I know it can take a long time just because babies might be slow at feeding, but if they don't want that full feed, then that's fine because to them that's just enough. And there's quite a lot of research that shows that breastfed babies are less likely to become obese and develop type 2 diabetes, and I think that's where it all stems from. So breastfed babies are sort of left alone a bit more to regulate their own appetite and understand their own hunger cues and when they should want to eat and want to drink. And I think with a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time with formula feeding on a real strict schedule, or even express breast milk, it's not just formula, but if you were expressing and feeding on a real strict schedule and making them have a full bottle when they might not want it, you're making them override that natural inbuilt cue. So yeah, I would say it shouldn't be that different, but I think it probably is. Like people, it's hard because we're so ingrained with this whole, oh, they do a feed at this time,
I can imagine like when they're maybe sleep deprived, new mums, like maybe they're firstborn and they're just not sure what to do, so they'd rather overfeed than underfeed, and you just have no idea about like the signals or anything. And it's right with the overfeeding as well. It's same in adults with leptin resistance. So the more that you ignore your fullness signals, you just keep eating, you eventually become leptin resistant. So you don't get the feelings of fullness anymore. So you need more and more and more food, and that's where metabolic syndromes, type 2 diabetes, obesity can come in down the line. So I absolutely agree that it's probably due to that. And if someone was to bottle feed either for medical reasons or choice, are there any brands or products that are better than others?
So mainstream advice would say no. They would say that all formulas are created equal. And there was this TV program on maybe about a year ago or so now that actually looked at the components of the different formulas and basically came to the conclusion that it doesn't matter if you buy own brand or hip organic, for example, because nutritionally they're the same. I would argue that although on paper they might be the same in terms of what's in it, it's about what's not in it. So there's certain things that potentially could crop up, like pesticides, pollutants, things like that. So I think if you were going to buy a commercial formula, I would just say opt for an organic variety. However, and I don't know loads about it, but it's definitely something I consider should I not be able to breastfeed in the future. you can actually make your own.
Right.
Now, I obviously wouldn't do this without supervision from somebody who really knew what they were doing. But Weston Price actually has a formula for homemade baby milk, and it's basically a base of raw either goats or cow's milk, with certain things added into it.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
I actually came across it first before I was even a mum. I don't think it may have been the Weston Price formula, I don't know, but somebody I used to follow on social media stopped breastfeeding at 6 months and then went on to homemade baby formula up until a year. So that's always an option, but again, I wouldn't just say, right, I'm not going to breastfeed, I'm just going to make formula and get in your kitchen. Like, I think it really needs to be done by somebody.
Definitely. Yeah.
But yeah, that's always an option.
And the sourcing as well of the milk. People are really scared of raw milk products, but a lot of the time they actually have more regulations and restrictions with the farming because it is unpasteurized and all of that. So sometimes the raw milk farms are more hygienic, more high quality than the conventional brands. So that's a good point as well. And I'll definitely see if I can find some articles or research and link that in the show notes for everyone listening. And apart from the lack of personalization and immune support potentially with formula feed, are there any other downsides? Again, not to scare anyone off, but are there any downsides that people should be aware of and take into consideration?
Yeah, there are. So with commercial sort of store-bought formula, there's often a lot of vegetable oils in there, which are high in omega-6 and inflammatory. And I think, well, they just want to be avoided, really. I actually think I don't understand why they're in there. Because we could just switch it out for something else. So
it must just be the price. You can't really put like coconut oil in there, so bump up the price quite a lot.
Well, the Weston Price formula, homemade, has coconut oil, I think. But yeah, so that'll be one of the big things that I'd point out. And then the other thing would be that there are synthetic vitamins and minerals, which, although some people might be fine absorbing, me, for example, I've got MTHFR mutation, so I know that I'm going to be less optimal at absorbing certain things. I suspect that Isla's probably got MTHFR. I've not done it yet. We will do a gene profile at some point, so she probably wouldn't have done very well with synthetic vitamins and minerals. So yeah, that they'd be the two that I pick out, really.
Yeah. And tell us more about the MTHFR. Like, what is that for some people who have no idea what it is, what it means?
Okay, yeah. I'm not an expert on it, but it's a particular gene that's linked with methylation, and in particular, when we're thinking about in relation to babies, folic acid or folate in particular. So those who have mutations on that particular, or SNPs on those genes, potentially either can completely not use the synthetic folic acid, or can, but not as much.
Yeah.
So, and we know that folic acid is one that even mainstream doctors will tell you that you need to take before and during pregnancy to avoid neural tube defects. Well, tongue tie is actually a mild form of a neural tube defect, some would argue. So actually now looking back on, I didn't plan for Isla. So although I was healthy, I was actually taking a multivitamin with folic acid in, because I didn't really know all about, things at that point. You learn as you go, don't you? And then I didn't find out I was pregnant until about 5 weeks. Then I ordered a supplement with methylfolate in it, methylated version, which I know I'll be able to use. But I probably didn't start taking it then until 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And really, I should have been taking it for probably a year before we conceived. So whether or not that played into Isla getting tongue tie or not, I don't know. But yeah, that's sort of MTHFR and what it means, really.
Yeah, and I think it affects like 40% of the population, so it's not like a rare like disease or anything. It's very common. It just basically means that you can't convert folic acid into folate well. Folate's the active form. So if you're not sure what your genetics are, most people won't be aware at all. You can do genetic testing through something like 23andMe, so that's a company that you can run your data through and find that information out. But the thing with folic acid as well is it actually blocks natural folate absorption. So a lot of grain products and cereal products, and like you said, the formula milks, this synthetic, the added synthetic versions are added to those things, and they're fortified with that. And even if you are getting nice healthy folate in a supplement, or you're having folate rich foods, things like leafy green vegetables, organ meats, legumes and things, then it could actually block the absorption of that. And yeah, if you're not sure what your genetics are, better to be safe than sorry to just go straight in with a folate. There's less conversion needed. It's really bioavailable to most people. So it's a little bit more expensive. It's probably not available on the Pregnica and like Sainsbury's prenatals or anything like that. But to pay that little bit extra and to get that reassurance that you're doing the right thing, and the most important like developments of the child do happen within those first few weeks. So ideally, yes, at least 3 months beforehand to be on one of those things consistently. But as soon as you can, if you're pregnant now, just swap it over and you're still going to get some benefit with that as well. And what's the connection between the tongue tie and not being able to breastfeed? Like what goes on with that?
So it's basically just restriction of the tongue. And it can just mean that if a lot of the time, well, with tongue tie, the palate can be high, which basically just means that a child can't effectively latch. And if they can latch, then potentially they're not going to be effectively removing milk as they should, which can then lead to other problems. But the thing probably worth touching on, and I was lucky that I'd probably done a lot of research into this beforehand, so I knew this and I knew to look out for it. But just because somebody's a midwife or a doctor doesn't mean that they're qualified to say whether or not your child has a tongue tie. So I had 3 different midwives look in Isla's mouth and told me that she didn't have one, but my gut instinct just told me that something was wrong. And it took me sort of 4 weeks to muster up the courage just to get out there and scream at somebody and say something is wrong. And then I actually saw an infant feeding specialist it's an IBCLC, which stands for Internationally Board Certified Lactation Consultant. Now, I would say that if you need any, I'm not one of those, I'm a peer supporter and I'll give good advice, but if you really want to be sure that you're getting the correct advice, especially when it comes to tongue tie, speak to an IBCLC. So yeah, and it can be hard as well, because if a midwife, the people in positions of authority, and if they're telling you that nothing's wrong and everything's fine, it can be really difficult. And then if you stop breastfeeding, but then come to weaning time, and then are told that they've got a tongue tie because they're unable to like deal with food properly in their mouth and swallow food and stuff, like how crushing is that going to be then? Thinking you could have potentially breastfed, So I just think I'm sorry, going off tangent a bit here, but just ask and ask again and check the advice that you're given. And if you think like mother's instinct is usually right, so if you think something's wrong, then just follow that up.
Yeah, I'm loving this tangent. No, carry on. I am enjoying it. What's the treatment for tongue tie? Is it like a surgery? Is it like physical therapy of the mouth or something?
Both, actually.
All right.
So it's basically literally a cut. So it's either by laser or by like a scalpel. We actually went privately to get it done, because this is another thing. NHS waiting list can be like 5-6 weeks,
right?
And you can't wait that long. Like, that could be the end of your breastfeeding journey. But there's somewhere in Huddersfield called Milk Matters, and that's where we took Isla. And I literally found out on the Friday and managed to get an appointment with them for the Saturday.
Amazing.
And it's literally there's no like anesthesia or anything. It's literally just a little cut. It was a little bit traumatic, probably more so for me than Isla, but things did improve when we had that done. But it wasn't a magic bullet. So although I have heard stories where it is like, oh, that's it, everything changes, it's amazing, I don't think it's always the case. But obviously it's definitely something worth investigating if you think that might be causing a problem.
And even in adulthood, I bet there's a lot of people who have like been overlooked and not diagnosed for it, and it may be contributing to health issues. I'm not sure, like maybe like breathing and oral microbiome, that's like a big thing these days. So I'm sure that there's a lot of people, maybe sleep apnea, breathing, mouth breathing. That could lead to so many things. So even really important.
even like neck pain as well. So if you've got somebody who suffers with like neck pain, chronic neck pain and things, then although mainstream sort of you know, physiotherapists and stuff would just look at the neck, actually muscles and everything are all connected. So even somebody with like neck pain or something like that, and also it can feed into dental health for children as well. So if you've got a high palate and, you know, improper development of the mouth, then it can lead to like crooked teeth, and then things like sleep apnea in children. Not the only thing though, there's other nutrients and things that play a part in like dental health, but
definitely. And last thing on the formula side, I know there's different like soy protein, there's obviously cow's dairy, there's goat's milk. How does someone know which one to choose? Is it just everyone start with the cow's dairy because that's the most similar, and then if they have allergies they move on, or are there different benefits for each?
Well, first things first, I'd say even if there was an allergy, ideally we'd be able to remove things from mum's diet and continue with breastfeeding. So that's a thing to note, because I think sometimes some people think, oh, we've got cow's milk protein allergy so we can't breastfeed. You actually can if you just remove the cow's milk from your diet. Because it's just passed through mother's milk. But in terms of different types of formula, I think it's probably, bar soy, I'd say it's probably down to personal choice and just what your child gets on best with. So some people report that goat's milk just seems to be a bit easier for babies to get on with. And you can get some commercial goat's milk formula as well. I think Nanny Care is one. But I definitely, it's hard. I don't even want to say stay away from the soy ones, because I know that in some instances, if you're not breastfeeding, and for whatever reason that is, and your child has an allergy, there's not really another option. Although I have heard of, and again, I'm not an expert, and please don't just go out and start making up bone broth formulas, but I have heard of making formulas up with a base of bone broth rather than milk. And I think that's something I'd explore if I was ever in that position, rather than opting for a soy formula, because with soy formulas, it's just, I mean, you're probably pushed to find an organic variety for a start. I don't think they exist, to be honest. So then you're looking at GMO, soy, and just not something that I would want even as part of Isla's diet now, let alone the only food that she's eating as an infant. So, but that's a tricky one, because I think this just highlights the importance of if you are feeding, you know, formula feeding or feeding soy milk, then just look for a professional who can help guide you with the choices, because it's hard. I don't want to scare anyone by saying don't use soy formula, because sometimes you have to, but
and there are concerns even with adults eating a lot of soy. Can interfere with the hormonal system, particularly estrogen levels. So there have been correlations with like early puberty for those with consuming soy protein formula. But just do what you can and make the best decision that you have available to you as well. Because it will be a stressful time, and you just want to do what's best for your child. No one's like intentionally harming their child in whatever way. So just give me, because I have again no idea of what to expect, but a typical day for a newborn, like what's the schedule? I know everyone's different as well, but just kind of go back 2 years and tell me like what a typical day was.
So we can expect for a real newborn to feed a minimum any time, sort of between 8 to 10 times a day. That's the minimum. So if I was working with a new mum who wasn't meeting the 8 times a day, I'd be asking her to like wake baby up and feed more. So that can quite often be a problem, actually, if babies are sleepy. You know, it's quite a journey being born. And a lot of the time we have medicalised birth with interventions and things, and babies can be quite sleepy and drowsy after that, and also with drugs and things like that. So I would say you would want to see baby waking up every 2 to 3 hours to be fed, even through the night. So I sometimes do speak to new mums, and like a couple of days in, oh, it's great, they slept 6 hours last night, and I'm like, oh, wake them up, you know.
Right. You're told never to wake a sleeping baby.
Honestly, it's the just worst advice ever. Like, maybe when they're, you know, the weight gain's fine, and you've established a bit of a rhythm, then fine, leave them to sleep. But definitely in those early days, I think having just seen the impacts of rapid weight loss in infants, and the stress that then that causes, and then a lot of the time when that happens, breastfeeding is over because mums panic, rightly so, because the child's losing weight, and we'll give formula. And my sister, actually, they were hospitalised maybe like 5 days after after she had a little boy, because she thought he was feeding, but how do you know what breastfeeding's like until you've actually done it? You don't know what it feels like, do you? So she was hospitalised, and not forced upon, but she actually texted me in the middle of the night crying because they'd made her give him a bottle. Luckily it was express milk, so they managed to get her milk. And then actually ever since that, she's ended up feeding with nipple shields, which is amazing because she's 10 months old now and she's still breastfeeding. And she don't mind it at all, and I hope she don't mind me talking about it. And that's worked for her perfectly fine. But because of that experience, she's had to mess around with sterilising nipple shields and things like that. So they can be an amazing thing, nipple shields, because they saved her breastfeeding journey. I forgot even what the beginning.
Yeah, so I was asking like how frequent and what a day in the life is. Like, can you do anything, or do you always have to be like ready to breastfeed?
Yeah, I would say in the first couple of weeks, especially, I'd even maybe go as far to say first couple of months, don't make any plans. Right. And just like stay in bed, like with Netflix on and your baby here, and just feed and prepare things in advance. So have soups and like bone broth frozen ready to pop into things or to warm up on a morning, and just get people to bring you food, just accept the food, you know. And yeah, so it can be pretty, there's been some days where it'll be amazing and they'll be settled, they'll feed, you'll put them down, you'll feel like a new woman, be able to make a cup of tea. And then there'll be other days where you literally can't even get out your pajamas because they're having a cluster feeding day where they're literally, because it's quite normal for babies to cluster feed and want to be literally on the breast for maybe 8 hours solid. Yeah. And
for what reason? Just hunger or comfort?
Both, and up in supply. So babies are like, I think they're just amazing little things. Like they tell your body what to do, and because breast milk's made on supply and demand, a baby could, it's their way of telling, it's sort of putting in your pre-order for the next day. That's the way we like to describe it. So again, they could be, but this is why women doubt things, because if you don't know about cluster feeding and you're not prepared for it to come, when it happens you're like, oh god, they're starving. There's nothing there, they're starving, they've been feeding for 6 hours. But it is all normal. And again, it comes back to the we see babies with dummies in their mouths all day long and don't think anything of it. But if they've got a nipple in their mouth all day, we start panicking, thinking something's wrong. But yeah, so it's very, very different, because I've known some babies be totally settled and just feed every 2 or 3 hours, and from 5 weeks start sleeping through the night. I like to call them unicorn babies. I don't think they come about very often. In my experience, definitely wasn't like that.
And what does it actually feel like breastfeeding?
So on the initial latch, especially in the early days, can be quite toe curling. That's the way we sort of describe it. It can be a little bit strange, but then there shouldn't be any pain when the baby sort of settles into the feed. But then it's so hard to describe, because you'll love this actually, and I bet you can't wait to experience it, because when a baby starts feeding, oxytocin's released, which is like the hormone of love, and that's what is responsible for creating what we call the letdown. And that's actually the sort of initial flow of milk like coming out of the breast. And the best way to describe that is you can actually feel like it sounds so cringy saying it, but it's like the warmth and like the rush. It's almost like you can physically feel a rush of hormones, and then it all just sort of settles in. So that's the best way of describing it. I'm sure you'll love that.
Yeah.
I feel like that's maybe one of the few times when you can actually feel the hormones working, if that makes sense.
What about when teeth come through? Does that make things a little less happy?
It does, yeah. Yeah, because babies, when they're teething as well, like, you know babies, even if you're not a parent, you know that all babies want to bite down and everything, especially when they're teething. So yeah, Isla's drawn blood a couple of times, and that's hard then, because then you have to feed on the non-bitten breast, but then you don't want the other one to get engorged, because then you run into other problems. So yeah, it's up and down, and there's always things that come up. But yeah, teeth can be difficult, and a lot of women stop because of teeth. But at least, even if you stop because of teeth, like, the child's near 6 months anyway, so you've done an amazing job to get there. But yeah, there is things like my advice would be when it came to teeth is just start off. I know they're a little baby and they don't really understand, but I would start off strict. So any little clamp down, bite straight off, and they'll soon learn that if they're biting, that they're off the boob then, and that's it. I don't know whether it works for everyone, but it did kind of work for us. And now
train them a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. So that'd be what I'd say.
And how do you deal with any like mastitis or any cuts or sores? Obviously, you don't want to be rubbing any chemical creams all over there. Are there any homemade things or any over-the-counter products that are recommended?
Yeah, there is a particular nipple cream that's amazing. I'll send you the details of it. And I would definitely say it's made out of sheep's wool, so it's 100% like a natural product made out of sheep's wool. And that's amazing. Like, first couple of weeks, I literally had a tube of that in my pocket at all times. That's really helpful. And then in terms of mastitis, generally it's caused by a few things. It can be infection or blocked ducts, which then can lead to infection. But you'll know it. With the difference between plugged ducts and mastitis is, with a plugged duct, it'll probably come on a little bit. And when I say plugged duct, I mean actual, like, a blocked milk duct. And it comes on quite gradually, and you'll feel like a hard lump and maybe an area of engorgement. You need to act quickly if that happens, because it can quickly become mastitis. So things like getting in a hot bath always worked for me. So any little sign of like a lump or anything, I just submit it. The thing is, it's easy to say do this, but if you're on your own with a baby, in the first few weeks, think of having a bath on your own, but I would say call on people at that stage. So if you do feel a lump, like, call somebody, get them feed as much as possible, because you want to keep the milk going. But a good massage in a hot bath always seems to do the trick. Epsom salts in the bath helps as well. But with mastitis, it can literally just come on overnight and it'll hit you like a bus. Even if feeding's been going pretty well, it can still sometimes, take hold. And with that, you'll literally feel like you've been hit by a bus. Fever, cold, flu-like symptoms. But you'll have stereotypical red marks sort of radiating from the affected area, almost looking like a little bit like stretch marks. That's like stereotypical, but it is mastitis. And at that point, you literally want to ring somebody and say, I need you to come home. I've experienced it, but luckily managed to nip it in the bud before antibiotics or anything like that were needed. So I literally told my boyfriend that day he couldn't go to work. He resisted a little bit as well, I think, at first. He was like, what do you mean? I was like, honestly, I know how this can go. And obviously I didn't want to have any antibiotics or anything. So he stayed at home. I fed as much as possible. There's a thing called dangle feeding as well, so you can literally lay baby down and then sort of dangle and feed over them, which can help, like, just make sure you're fully draining the breast, because that's really important, just draining
gravity.
And then another thing I did as well is I literally smashed back loads of raw garlic, and I don't know whether the thing that helped or not, but within a couple of hours I felt much better. So I just literally crushed up maybe 3 or 4 cloves, left them open a bit, for the allicin to really come out, and then just swallowed them whole. And a lot of people can't do that, can they?
And would that like negatively impact the breast milk? So you just have to like not use that, or? Well,
it's just about taste. That's the only thing.
Okay.
So if then baby was to refuse the breast after you'd had 6 cloves of garlic, it could just be that it's the taste. That's all. But then it'll soon be gone. Like, it's totally safe to feed baby. And also, even if you've got mastitis and that's an infection, it is still safe to give baby that milk. It can look a bit funny if you're expressing and going through mastitis. It can look a bit like lumpy. You can just some women literally just strain out the lumps if baby's a bit fussy, or there's like little like milk bits of milk fat and stuff like that. But it is safe to feed baby.
What about the cabbage leaves on the breast for mastitis?
Yeah.
Is that real? Is that effective?
Yeah, it's a total real thing. I actually never did it. I did like I've had like frozen peas and ice and things. I did like the whole coal, but I've never done the cabbage. But I think it, like, I hear about it working really well. And the thing is with cabbage leaves as well is it's easy because you can just put them in your bra and carry on your day. So it's something I never tried, but maybe next time, maybe I will if I need to. But it is a total real thing though. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I'm loving all of these. Food as medicine, this is totally my vibe. And the garlic, maybe working on the vascular system, so like open up the cardiovascular, and helps with heart issues, circulatory issues. So that may be how that's working. And with food maybe influencing breast milk, how can that be a positive or negative thing? Like, are there any certain foods that help with breast milk quality, breast milk supply, and are there any foods that you shouldn't be eating because babies really don't like them?
So I'll talk about supply first. Certain foods that can galactagogues, I believe is the technical term. I hope I've said that right. There's certain foods that can help increase milk supply. Now, the only thing I would reiterate here before sort of giving people advice on what to eat to increase supply is just work out whether or not you've actually got a supply issue to start with. Because again, if it's just that baby's feeding loads, that's not an indicator that you've got a supply issue. But yeah, certain things are.
How would someone know if they do or don't?
So I'll be looking at loads of different things, but nappy output. So if your child is feeding, let's say every 2 to 3 hours for half an hour at a time, taking both breasts, but the nappy output isn't there and you're not getting engorged, then that would maybe suggest that there isn't enough milk there. That's probably the only thing, to be honest, because if it's just a fussy baby or an unsettled baby, that's not an indication that you've, a couple of things together. So lack of engorgement, but baby feeding loads and not having the nappy output, and weight problems, that's when I say potentially think about. But also a lot of these foods, one food in particular, oats, and that's something that a lot of people just eat anyway. So there's no harm in just having porridge for breakfast, because that's a normal food that you would normally eat. I would just steer away from maybe the more like supplemental forms if you actually don't know whether you've got a problem, because oversupply is a whole other issue. So yeah, oats, I just automatically, because I like porridge, and it's easy overnight oats, especially when you're a new mum, you can just sort of actually my other half used to leave in the morning for work and bring up my tub of oats to put at the side of the bed. So at whatever point I managed to like sit up for a few minutes and have some sweet, I could eat that. So oats is a great one. And you can even double up on that as well and use oat milk. So I used to make my own, it's so easy, just blitz up oats in water and then strain it out. So you can literally make your porridge with oat milk, so you're getting double whammy. There are some oat milk brands out there that you can buy, and on the Facebook group that we have for the charity in Wakefield, there's a lot of mums who rant and rave about certain oat milks, like Oatly, which is it tastes amazing. But I just wouldn't have too much of it, because it does have vegetable oils in it. But Plenish do an oat milk that doesn't have any vegetable oils in. So if you want to buy one, maybe buy that one. So again, things like this, like a Plenish milk will store for like months in the cupboard. So you can just have a few of them in and just have the odd glass when you're a new mum, or just use it in porridge and things like that. And another good one is brewer's yeast, which can be really good for adding into it doesn't taste very nice, so adding it into smoothies and things like that. Now you can buy like pre-made lactation smoothies, which the only thing is, because they're amazing, if they get your milk supply up, then that's an amazing thing if you really do need it. But a lot of them, because it tastes so bad, they're full of sugar to hide the brewer's yeast, which is never going to be a good thing, eating loads of it. So better if you can make your own and just put in like fruits and vegetables in there with your smoothie.
Shove a banana in there, that'll mask anything.
And just get it down. But brewer's yeast can be really effective. And then another one that I actually don't have any personal experience with is fenugreek. But I think it's been used, well, for centuries really, to increase breast milk. But I have heard that it literally comes out in your pores. So if you supplement it, you can literally start smelling it.
Okay.
But then I've heard reports from some women where that just doesn't work for them, and it can actually do the opposite. So again, it just comes back to that, how everybody's different, and you just have to try different things. Hydration's massive though. Just make sure that you're hydrated. So they'd be the things that I'd say in terms of helping milk supply. In terms of specific nutrients for like milk and milk quality, mainstream advice, including the way I was trained, would say that as long as you're eating enough calories, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter. You'll make nutritious milk for your baby. And I know why people say that. It's because we don't want to scare people off by saying that you have to have a perfect diet to make perfect milk. But at the same time, I think it's quite naive to think that if we have a mother that's severely deficient in certain vitamins and minerals, that she can then just magically make it in her breast milk. Because if humans had the capacity to do that, we would do it all the time. We wouldn't have deficiencies. So I definitely think it's important to eat a quality diet, a whole food, real food. And certain things in particular would be, I know you're a big fan of organ meats, and I'd be saying about liver for vitamin A.
Yeah.
And it's a bit controversial. I mean, really, the whole breastfeeding diet, if you want to call it that, breastfeeding nutrition, is actually the same as what you should be eating for pregnancy and
general health,
and even just always. So vitamin A is a funny one though, because it's quite controversial in terms of pregnancy. But all I would say is just do your own research on that, because vitamin A is massively important for infant fetus development, and then an infant that's developing. And probably one of the few sources that maybe day-to-day women today would be like pate, from liver. And even if it's not the best quality, at least it's actually getting some liver in. But then we're told when we're pregnant not to eat it. And I would just say do your own research, because from what I've looked into and the people I've spoken to, I think there's only ever been 7 cases of where it affects a fetus and can cause like birth defects and things, and that was with doses above 25,000 international units, which is pretty big. So I'd say, I maybe wouldn't go in and say start supplementing with high dose cod liver oil and things, but I'd say food first. So get the organ meat in, get the liver in, don't be scared of it. And that's the same for breastfeeding. So because a lot of women are deficient in like vitamin A anyway, then they're going to pregnancy deficient, and then they're scared of it, all this, and then they're going to breastfeeding deficient. So your milk can be deficient in vitamin A. So I would say vitamin A is a good one. And in traditional cultures as well, so like in Asia, for example, it's customary that when that you'll bring a simmered pig's feet and snouts and things, to a new mum.
Right. Okay.
Simmered in rich broth that's full of collagen and gelatin and things like that. And it's because like traditional cultures recognize that we need these real nutrient dense foods, and especially for breastfeeding mums. And again, Asia, another one, like new mums will eat up to 10 eggs a day in the first couple months of breastfeeding, and maybe extra egg yolks on top of that. So eggs is a good one, and another good one to get in. Vitamin D, mainstream advice is to supplement vitamin D if you're breastfeeding, supplement your baby. I would argue that actually the best thing to do would be to check your levels pre-pregnancy, and during pregnancy, and supplement accordingly to make sure your levels are optimum, not just NHS good, to make sure that then your milk isn't going to be vitamin D deficient. And then obviously just make it's harder if baby's born in winter, but if baby's born in summer, just getting them out in the sun without sun cream for 10 minutes.
Ooh, controversial.
Without sun cream,
like humans have never done that in the rest of history.
I know. And then fat is a massive component of breast milk, and arguably one of the most important. So generally the higher fat quality, the higher fat content of milk, the better, and that's better for developing infants. So if your diet is deficient in fats, which we know a lot of, especially women today, restrict fats, then your milk's going to be deficient in like essential fatty acids, DHA, and things like that. So just really important to make sure, and you're eating the fats, and ways to do that would be like grass-fed butter. Western Price actually recommends 4 tablespoons of grass-fed butter a day for lactating women. Lard, and then just your good quality organ meats like we mentioned, and just meat
egg
in general,
yolks, fish, coconut products.
Arachidonic acid, that's another one to pick up on as well, specifically from like meat fats and things. That's really important. And all these things as well, actually, just to directly link it to actual structure of the breast and breastfeeding, is a lot of women struggle with like cracked nipples, sore nipples, and that can potentially be prevented a little bit by making sure that you've got a diet rich in collagen and vitamin C and zinc and things that are going to support healthy skin. So structure of your nipple, healthy cell junctions, which can then potentially prevent, other things like cracked nipples and things happening. So there's no like magic pill. It is just eat really well, but before, during, and when you're breastfeeding, it all feeds in really. And also it feeds in again to the fact that this type of diet, as well as being nourishing the baby through your milk, will help you recover quickly.
Absolutely.
So like
talk more about that. Yeah, we talk more about that on episode, I think it's 21, but I'll link it in the show notes, that I did with dietitian Lily Nichols, who has the Real Food for Pregnancy website and book, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. It is more preconception, but again, it's still the same. Like, I follow that dietary advice, and I'm not trying to get pregnant anytime soon. So, she talks about all the Western A price stuff, and bone broths and collagen, and how it helps with the elasticity of your skin during pregnancy, potentially reducing the risk of stretch marks and then tearing during labour. All of that, people think, it's just bad luck if you have some of these things, it's genetic, it's just one of those things, but there's so many things that you can do to prevent this from happening. And don't be afraid of fat, beneficial for literally everything. The absorption of these fat soluble vitamins D, E, A and K that you've just been talking about as well. And could you just finish up with the foods that are a no for a lot of babies, like they just don't do well with, or foods to reduce or limit in the diet whilst breastfeeding?
Yeah, so research does show that trans fat does pass through into breast milk. Again, although I don't want to scare any new mums into thinking you literally have to have the perfect diet and you can't eat a slice of cake every now and again, because you totally can, and it's all about balance. But just be mindful of it, basically. What you eat will potentially pass through into breast milk. So things like eating a lot of refined foods, processed foods, cookies, cakes, all these types of things will directly show up sort of, trans fats and things in breast milk. So just again, highlighting importance for eating well, but also other things to consider are potential environmental toxins that can show up in breast milk too, which is actually really concerning. BPA, for example, found in plastic, shows up in breast milk and in infant urine as well. So just try as you would if you were preparing for pregnancy. We hope you would anyway, and throughout pregnancy, just maintain that level of staying away from plastics, eating organic where possible, Yeah, reducing not having air fresheners and things like that, all your general stuff that I know you spoke about before.
Yeah, and I think we are still in like a bit of a bubble. Like, we know all of this stuff. Probably people listening to this podcast are aware of environmental toxins, but the average person still has no idea about maybe heating up plastic Tupperware or plastic bottles. Like, what are your thoughts on that with like heating formula? I'm not sure like the whole process, but in plastic, because I remember like didn't they used to use glass bottles for babies? Like, when did all of that switch over?
So you can get glass bottles for baby, and this is a really good point. I'm glad you brought it up, because if you are having to bottle feed or choose to bottle feed, then definitely go for glass bottles. I think all bottles these days are BPA free, but as I'm sure you'll agree, like BPA free, like I'm sure in 5 years' time there'll be another one that we're talking about.
BPS or
so BPA makes plastic hard. So if that's not in there, we have to put something else in. So yes, even just putting anything hot in a bottle, you know, it's just really scary in my opinion. So yeah, glass bottles, and obviously once your baby's old enough to maybe hold the bottle themselves, you can get bottles with like a silicone cover around, so that they're not going to be able, if they drop it, it's not going to smash and things like that. So obviously just bear in mind safety, but yeah, definitely glass all the way. Do on Nuke, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but that brand, they do glass bottles. I did buy just one, in the hope that I'd be able to give Isla a bottle of express breast milk and get out and about, but that never went to plan. But we did have one, so yeah. Glass.
Great. Yeah, link to any products that you think of in the show notes as well. Last few questions on breastfeeding, then we'll get on to things like we've mentioned how to stay healthy and ask for support and all of that. We'll talk a bit about weaning in a second, but are there any things like milk banks? So I've seen some of my clients in the US have milk donors, or they talk about that quite a lot. Is that a thing in the UK that you can get? Is it legal, or do you have to kind of do it with friends and family?
Yes, it is a thing, and it's totally legal. In the hospitals, you can actually request it as well. The only thing is, any milk given in hospitals has to be screened and things, which is obviously a good thing anyway. But again, this is another thing that a lot of women, particularly in the UK, like you say, maybe don't know. So if you happen to have a baby early, for whatever reasons, and then baby's maybe in a special care unit and tube fed, even if your milk hasn't come in, so you can't physically give them your milk yet, because it can take a couple of days, and if you can't successfully express colostrum and things, you can request donor milk and do it that way rather than giving formula. But then this is a perfect chance to mention colostrum harvesting as well. So you actually can, from 37 weeks, start to hand express colostrum into syringes and then freeze them. And then should you have any problems in the first couple of days, or a couple of days probably, you've got some stores frozen there. So that is a massive big tip for any new mums. I actually didn't do that. In hindsight, I totally wish I would have done. My sister did it with great success. She had like syringes and stuff in the freezer. It made me so proud.
It's something that I'd have in my freezer now. I'm all weird.
Exactly. You'd be like, oh, have you got anything left?
Feeling a bit, my immune system's a little bit depleted today.
She should see it. Next time I'm pregnant, I'm probably going to open a shop up, you know.
Get one of the coats, just open up the coat, trench coats.
I actually think it actually may be illegal to sell breast milk. But yeah, there's a website called Human Milk for Human Babies, and that's, I've not had to do it, so I don't know loads about it, but that is sort of the go-to. But then I don't know, because it brings up a whole other question, doesn't it, as to whether then what's the diet of the mum that you're getting it from?
I know.
So
I'd be like, I need a food diary, 7 days. I need your medical history.
Did you eat any cake last week? No, I'm kidding. Like, one slice of cake's fine. So a tricky one really. I'm not sure whether I would ever go down the route of solely using donor milk. But it definitely has a place, because as soon as you start introducing formula, which is readily available and easy to get, you run the risk of getting a supply issue because you're adding in too much formula and not having enough actual feeding. So that's where it can really be beneficial, because it's not as easily available, so you're going to be more inclined to keep breastfeeding if you know what I mean. But also there's a whole thing of the virgin gut. I don't know if you've come across that term before.
No.
And actually giving any formula, there's some research to suggest that it totally alters the composition of the gut, even 1 bottle a day, let's say, of formula. So that's another reason why donor milk might be beneficial if you need to supplement a little bit just until things settle down. So it is a total thing.
Would this just be for like medical reasons, or would it be like someone is having issues, maybe they're at 6 months and they don't want to just carry on, and maybe they need to go back to work, they can't breastfeed all the time, could they just request it then, or would it just be like in medical settings for?
So it would be, you could probably find somebody who'll be willing to donate milk to you at any point at all, but that wouldn't be something that would be done through your doctor. It would in the beginning, like if baby was really, really young, but then you'd have to sort of find it yourself, source it yourself. So there'll be no screening there, so you have to bear that in mind. So I mean, if someone was returning to work at 6 months, you can totally still keep breastfeeding. At that point, baby's going to be eating solid food, you'd hope, or at least starting eating solid food, drinking water. So you can hopefully maybe express and have a couple of bottles left with whoever's looking after the baby. So and feed morning, feed night. I started leaving Isla at probably about 10 months, not for work, but to actually go into college. I had to do my sort of keep in touch days, on my year out. And she actually never had any other form of milk other than breast milk straight from the tap. So she just had water and food during the day, and she was fine. She didn't die, she didn't starve. So there is ways, that you can keep. And workplaces these days as well, again, this is a whole other issue, but workplaces these days are a lot more accommodating, and there is rules and regulations and laws in place to protect breastfeeding mums as well. So if you're having any problems with anything like that, then just definitely seek advice.
Okay. And how does someone know like when to introduce foods, how long to breastfeed for? Because I think, is it the average is 2 years, like across the world? Is it 2 years or 4?
4 years.
4, right?
Yeah. So the world average is 4 years.
Interesting.
But only 1% of babies in the UK are breastfed exclusively to 6 months, which is a tiny proportion. And NHS advice is exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, which that means only breast milk, nothing else, and then breastfeeding for minimum of a year beyond, so 1 year plus, alongside foods. The World Health Organization takes it a step further, and they say exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, and then breastfeeding for minimum 2 years and beyond, for as long as is working for everybody. 2 years was always my goal, and I'm thankful to say that we did get there. She's now 2.5 and showing no signs of stopping. I don't want to say I want to stop, because I definitely don't. She can stop when she's ready, but when you start thinking, it'd be nice now, but anyway, we'll let her decide. So but 4 years is the average.
Right.
So
and how do they like tell you that they had enough? Like, do they just stop asking for it, or?
I think every baby's different, and a lot of babies will drop feeds a lot. They'll just start dropping feeds out naturally, basically. But it is worth mentioning that if a child is dropping feeds, especially before 1, in terms of, well, dropping feeds is fine while you introduce food. What I mean actually is more of a nursing, we call it a nursing strike. So if the child is refusing any milk, especially before the age of 1, but potentially up to the age of 2, that isn't actually natural weaning. That is a nursing strike, and there's a reason why that child's doing it. It could be illness, or it could be that they're having too much other foods. So there's certain things that you can do to protect that and make sure that you keep breastfeeding if you want to. A lot of women use it as a way, to wean, and that's absolutely fine. But if you do want to make it to the 2 years, then just because they might not want to feed for a day or 2 doesn't mean that that's them weaning. It could be a nursing strike, so I would still keep encouraging breastfeeding. But then in terms of how do you know when they're ready to completely wean, or it's just let them lead. That's what I think. I think all too often as parents, we want to think we know what's best and what they need, when actually, like, I think they're probably more in tuned than adults, because they've not had all this extra conditioning and overriding, like, you know, hunger signals and things like that. So just let them lead. If you're happy with natural term weaning, just let them lead. So a lot of babies or children that are Isla's age now, if they are still breastfeed, might only be breastfeeding in the morning or on a night, you know, 1 feed, 2 feeds a day. Isla probably still has 4 or 5 if I'm with her all day. But Isla did take a while to really take to food. And again, I think they're all just so different.
Yeah.
They're just so different, yeah.
And is it the same with like knowing how much food to give them? Is it just like intuitive, they'll just stop eating when they're full? It's like being scared of like overfeeding them or not giving them enough calories or nutrients from the diet?
Yeah. So my opinion of it is yeah, trust them, they know. There's a saying that food before 1 is just for fun. So if you do notice that your child's, this is why I mentioned the before 1, is sort of not interested in breast milk or even formula milk or anything, but more interested in food before the age of 1, then I would reduce the amount you're giving them to eat and replace that with milk, because that should be their sole source of nutrition up to age 1. But yeah, just go with them. So I'd say at 6 months, just start with breakfast maybe, or whatever fits into your lifestyle.
Yeah.
Start with 1 meal and just see how they get on, and then just build it up from there. I think a lot of people jump straight in and think, right, 3 meals a day from 6 months. And if that's 3 meals a day of like amazing homemade broths and egg yolks and things like that, maybe that's okay. But I think it's too much too soon. And just by the age 1, we'd like to see a child eating 3 meals a day. But that can be literally just by the age 1. So if 11 months they're having 2 meals a day, that's absolutely fine. Very good healthy meals.
Yeah, and it's like if you've been on a juice cleanse or something, or you've been ill, so you've not been eating a lot, and then you go and have like a huge buffet meal, then yes, you are going to be like struggling with digestive symptoms and not feeling great. So it's the same. Just imagine if you hadn't ever eaten a solid food, you wouldn't want to just overload that all at once. And is there any downsides of introducing before the 6 months? Like, why is it 6 months that's recommended?
Yeah, so previously it used to be 4 months, and new research has come about to suggest that it should be 6 months, just because that's when the gut is the most mature and ready to accept foods. I would say always go for 6 months, and I would also bear in mind due date, and if your baby was early. So if you had a really early baby, 2 months early, then when they're 6 months, potentially they're not actually 6 months old, they're more like 4. Do you know what I mean? So just bear that in mind. But what was the next part of your question?
Yeah, so with introduction of food early on, like, are there any negative effects of that?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was to do with allergens. So introduction of allergens too early.
Right.
Again, with the gut not being ready, but actually new research is suggesting that early introduction of allergens now actually reduces the risk of developing allergies. Now, I wouldn't go as far to say as introduce them earlier than 6 months still. My personal opinion of it is I don't think anybody really knows the right time, because everybody's different, but I would go with 6 months as the ballpark, because in my opinion you potentially could do harm by doing it early. You're not going to do harm by waiting until 6 months. But then at the same time, at 6 months, I would bring in, 1 food a day gradually, but I would try and get those allergens out of the way quick. So nuts, shellfish,
gluten, dairy.
Dairy, get them in, and eggs, and bring them in with a bang as well. So, give that 1 food that day and see. Because I think in the past we'd sort of been told to hold off then. And I did that with Isla. So Isla didn't have any gluten until she was past 1. She didn't have, eggs until I think maybe like 7 or 8 months. She had egg yolk, but not actual egg whites. But I would do it differently next time, because that's what we have to go with, the research and the science, and it's suggesting that potentially us waiting might be leading a little bit to the increase in allergies and things like that.
Yeah, and I always think about that, like with breastfeeding, is that a good time to start? Like if you've been gluten and dairy free yourself, is it not worth having some to pass through to the milk, or is it just not the right time? Is it good to wait till that 6-month mark?
I think that's probably I think it's probably a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even if you're sensitive to them?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, sorry. If you're sensitive to them, I'd say not, because that's going to create inflammation and then that's going to affect the developing fetus. So definitely not if you're sensitive to them.
Okay.
And that's of no harm. A lot of, there was a story in the news a couple of years ago about a baby that was gluten-free and had died from malnutrition or something, and it was because they weren't eating gluten, and it wasn't, obviously, because of that. So don't be scared. Like, it's completely fine to not have gluten in a baby's diet or pass through your milk. Like, you're not cutting a food group if you're not eating gluten, or just to mention that.
Yeah, there's no like health benefits of having gluten in the diet. You can absolutely replace it with more nutrient dense foods. Are there any top 5 recommendations for foods that are good to wean with? And talk a little bit more, I know we're running short on time, on baby-led weaning. Like, what is that, and what foods could you start off with?
Yeah, so baby-led weaning is basically what it is, the name. It's letting your baby lead in terms of what they want to eat. So it's the idea of not actually force feeding your child anything that they wouldn't naturally pick up and put in their mouth. I do think it's really good, but I also think traditional weaning has a place. And like in traditional cultures, mums have even done things like chew up food for babies and then put it in babies' mouths. And baby-led weaning would say that we shouldn't do that, because it's not letting baby do it themselves. But actually, I'd argue that it may be potentially there's a place for it. There's a place for it all. And the beauty of maybe doing a bit of both, if you're doing like purees alongside finger foods, is you can then make sure that, giving a piece of broccoli is amazing. Like, it's a great food, it's amazing. But giving them a bone broth mixture with sweet potato, or maybe some egg yolk mixed in there, and maybe some pureed liver, like, they're probably not going to eat that finger food, but you can get it in them as a puree.
Definitely.
And I would say obviously be respectful. So if they're not opening their mouth for the spoon, then you don't give them it, but that's the difference between baby-led and sort of traditional weaning. And then key foods would be, I've mentioned a few of them. Egg yolks, from really, like, literally from bang on 6 months, I start giving little taste of egg yolks, really nutrient rich.
Would you cook them, or is it okay to give them raw if they're really high quality?
Yeah, I would say, personally, I'd say it's okay to give them raw. I think mainstream advice might differ from that. I actually just made like a boiled egg and then scooped the inside out for Isla. I ate the white and she ate the yolk. So yeah, egg yolk, all your vegetables. I always like to sort of say keep it green. A lot of people give fruits because baby like sweet stuff, and breast milk's naturally sweet. So I think we have to play a part in training the taste buds to like the more savoury stuff. So I would keep it. I like even go one step further. I would keep it completely green, green vegetables, and maybe some egg yolk and maybe some liver and things like that initially. And then move on to things like root vegetables, sweet potatoes, steamed or roasted. And then once you've done it sort of maybe a bit more on the bland side for a couple of months, I'd then start playing around with spices and things, because how can we expect children to like all this different food that we're exposed to if we're just feeding them steamed vegetables? So start playing around with spices and things like that. But
amazing.
Avoid the baby rice and the baby conventional, baby foods and stuff. Like, I'd say avoid them.
For what reason?
Low in nutrition, synthetic vitamins and minerals, as we've spoke about. A lot of the time they'll have vegetable oils in them, which again we want to avoid. So you can even get like baby porridge, but choose oats.
Good marketing, that's what it is.
Yeah, and even like a lot of parents don't want to give oats because they're quite big, but you can literally grind them up in a blender to make like ready breath, and you've got your own ready breath then, and make it that way.
Amazing.
So yeah.
But the Farley's rusk do taste very good, though, I must admit.
Yeah,
they were my thing. I know.
Sugar as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's, crazy.
Yeah, stick with a real whole food. I think that's the takeaway message from this section. So this has been an amazing podcast, Amie. Thank you so much for your time. I think we've got a good hour and a half of content here for people to listen to. So just to wrap up, are there any, apart from what you've mentioned, any additional resources, any like podcasts for mums or books or companies that you can point to for some people with breastfeeding in mind?
Yeah, there's a couple. So there's a website called Kelly Mom, and that's MOM American.com, kellymom.com. And that's got amazing advice for any problems that you might run into breastfeeding. So definitely check that one out. There's a book that I recommend everybody reads. It's called My Child Won't Eat by Carlos Gonzalez. I'll send you the details. And that, even just before food stage, that just talks all about feeding and overfeeding and bottle feeding, breastfeeding. It's amazing. So definitely check that one out. And then when it comes to weaning, there's a book called Super Nutrition for Babies. And again, I'll link to that. I'll let you link to that one, but that's an amazing one just to help you in terms of first foods and things like that.
Great. And where can people maybe get in touch with you? The foundation that you mentioned you're a part of, is that just people local to where you are, or can anyone join the Facebook group, get in touch?
So strictly speaking, we're for the Wakefield area, Kirklees, but anyone can join the Facebook group. We're not going to turn away anybody in need. And we have a 24-hour helpline as well, which again, strictly speaking for Wakefield mums, but again, if somebody rings needing help, it's people like me who man the helpline. We're not going to turn anybody away, so I can definitely give you the details of that as well. And finding me, best place is Instagram. It's at the Mummy Nutritionist, and that was the best place at the moment because I'm currently in the midst of setting up my business, but we're not quite up and running and everything yet, so that's the best place to get me. Yeah,
so they can stay up to date with what's going on with you, and if they're interested in working with you in the future, they can find out more about that on your Instagram page. So yeah, once again, thank you. Great episode. I've learned a lot, and you've not scared me off having children. So that's what I'm scared about. So thanks a lot, Amie.
No, thank you for having me. It's been really, really fun.